Hello everyone, Marco Collective Gamer CG77 here, and today we'll be doing the unpacking and quick overview of the retro shooter Pandora Box. As you've seen in other videos, after lifting up the box, you will see that you do have to put the guns together, but they are packed very well. And then underneath, you've got the pedals for games like Time Crisis, the actual Pandora Box unit itself, which is really tiny. It's really about the size, footprint-wise of like a coaster, for like a beer stein or something. But it's, of course, it is fairly thick. It's about, let's see, just about an inch thick, but really light, since it is just a Pandora's box. You do have some other pieces. One thing I did opt for, the extra hub box, and supposedly you can use this with your PC, and it'll use the guns like if it were an optical mouse. So later on, I will try to hook it up and try to see if it works with House of the Dead for PC Steam, since you can use the mouse for that. Again, that's the House of the Dead remake, so I'm hoping the guns would work for that. There's also, of course, the different cables that it comes with. Quite a bit here, and of course, since there is some assembly required, do also, of course, get the screwdriver. You do use this card piece, so to save trees, you basically just use the QR code in order to access the manual. Now, taking a look at the gun pieces themselves, they do feel pretty solid. Again, they're light plastic, so I mean, they're not hefty or anything compared to a real pistol. You do see, of course, the connections here, which should correspond to the connections here. Pretty straightforward. You do, of course, have some buttons here, a little analog stick, and another button here. After snapping them together, there will be some screw holes here on each side to ensure that you've got a nice tight fit. And the same area, you've also got the sensors that you'll put on top of your TV screen. Pretty straightforward as well. Got the sensor with a lever here, hinge, so you can put the kind of stand which will brace against the TV. Here are the tiny screws that you'll use to affix to the gun pieces themselves. I was slightly wrong. Looks like the feet that actually hold and brace the cameras are actually just swiveled in the right actually here. So the way they would work is you would fix it and holds it by friction. This part holds onto the lip of the TV. This would be against the back. Once you have the right proper angle, you just tighten the screw, and that's what braces it using friction. So piece is actually right there. I thought there was a separate piece I would hinge into. The main unit itself, I'm not sure if it comes out on camera, but it looks like it does. You can't see that it says 4 light gun, and you've got the USB-A spots right there for the light guns. And in the back, it tells you where to plug in for the pedals and where to plug in for the gun recoil. So pretty straightforward. Of course, one thing that's a little funky is the USB for the light guns go here, but for the power of the recoil, the plug is all the way back here. So I did have to split the wire a little bit in order for that to really make sense and reach. I am kind of surprised that they just didn't put it either next to each other, on top, or somewhere on the sides. So that is one piece, just ergonomics wise, I'm surprised, because otherwise it's going to look like this. And same way with gun 1, it's going to look a bit askew and odd. Fire-based edition, it comes with one USB cable that'll plug into your PC. And you've got, of course, the breakout. And this is the type of design I was really hoping for the base unit itself, where the USB and then power for both the pedals and the recoil are right next to each other. This was definitely makes a lot more sense. So fingers crossed that it does work well or flawlessly with, say, Steam version of the House of the Dead remake. Being able to use a gun with that game would be amazing. Alright everyone, here's some gameplay. So we're doing Terminator 2. This is one of my favorite games. And, you know, honestly, when I saw the price that Retro Shooter was selling at, especially when they had their sales, I got this for $230. Of course, it came with the pedals for free. I did spend an extra $30 to get the PC attachment, and it works really well. Of course, I was very much tempted by the Arcade 1-Up release of the T2 cabinet, but since, of course, there were a lot of little kind of snafus and errors, and especially the cost for only having one game, I just couldn't justify the cost. So I'm very, very happy that I was able to get that this is part of one of the emulated games on the Retro Shooter. Now, would I've liked more games? Of course, but at least a lot of the core games here are definitely included. This is only, of course, using one gun, and of course there's two USBs, one USB for the gun itself just for it to work, and then the other portion is a plug for the power in order for it to of course get power for the actual recoil action. The only game that really uses the pedals is Time Crisis, and that of course is the PlayStation version, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I did calibrate the gun itself, and it works really well. This is still, of course, a quarter muncher, so you will definitely die a lot, but definitely a lot of fun. And I mean, I was playing this and just had a huge smile on my face. It completely brought me back to, being 12, 13 and playing this game in the arcades at the local bowling alley. So, definitely one of the standout games I will always plug in and play. Next up is a PlayStation game from Namco, very much in the vein of Time Crisis. You don't use the pedals here. There's two ways to actually play this game when you reload. One way to reload is to actually point the gun away from the screen and then coming back. I did notice a little bit of delay there, so that could change your accuracy. What I did notice though is you could use the grenade button to go ahead and reload that way, and that's what I actually ended up doing into the later stages of this game. And then that really made my accuracy and the kind of a little bit of the drift kind of go away. So that is definitely one thing. So if there are games where it requires you to point away from the screen, just check and make sure you're able to go ahead and use the alternate buttons to go ahead and reload. It makes the game a lot easier, and you don't have to make sure that you're calibrating as much. Of course, if you are using more than one player, each player or each light gun would have to be calibrated. Next up is Confidential Mission on the Dreamcast, of course, also emulated very much in the vein of Virtual Cop. It is, of course, published and made by Sega. Game itself even has the Justice Shot and everything else. So very sweet, and a nice part in this one. Had no problems with the control, with the aiming. Plays very well, sounds great. There were no hiccups. There was no pauses or loads. I mean, this is definitely one of the standout games to play on the Retro Shooter, especially if you've never had a chance to play it on the Dreamcast, especially since when it was released in the United States, the Dreamcast gun was actually banned. So the only way to really play this was either using a mouse or using control pad, which was definitely not ideal. Fortunately, if you were importing the game, you were still able to actually use the gun. And honestly, plays very well. All the games right now are running in 720p. I didn't bother to try to put it in 1080, just because my TV does a good job of going ahead and up-resing a lot of the games naturally. So, and that's fine. To each their own. The one thing I did do for my TV is I did turn on and force the 4x3 mode, because otherwise the RetroPad shooter will basically force a 16:9. So in some games, especially the older ones, it will be a little stretch. For some of the newer games, it'll be fine. Now this is Lupin, also by Sega. I never actually got to play this. I didn't see this in the arcades here in the States. There is a lot of Japanese, especially part of the game is story-based, and there'll be some kind of mini bonus games. So A lot of it, of course, I didn't understand choosing, and I ended up choosing a mini game versus the next story game. So there is that. The controls, no problem whatsoever. The only hiccup I really had in the emulation was when it came to the cutscenes. The sound was kind of overly blasted, and it was also really scratchy when it comes to the voices. I think it was just basically the way the game itself emulated the sound effects. The other game I didn't do on here was House of the Dead 2, only because other reviewers went ahead and reviewed that. There's definitely some texture pop-ins, things like that, but the game plays just fine. Definitely not as good as the Dreamcast version, just because of those texture pop-ins, but controls just fine, especially with the light gun stick. So definitely, this was still a fun game. Again, you will kind of fumble a little bit just because between rounds, as you choose your next area, it's in Japanese. So they either use your Google Translator app on your phone, or just play it around and kind of get used to know what's a story mission and what's a bonus game. Otherwise, it's pretty zany, and of course, it's by Sega, so it's definitely on point when it comes to the gun shooting piece. All right, next up we've got, I believe this is Ranger Mission. I honestly don't recall if this ever came home or if it is from the Dreamcast, so I do apologize for that. This one's interesting. So it's a different, basically, scenarios it's presenting. So this first kind of mission is going through kind of like a recon field, and then the next mission after that is actually a sniper mission. So it's got a good variety. I didn't try, of course, two guns. I just did one, trying to get used to the controls itself. Of course, in this game, you can use the alternate button in order to reload if you needed. So, again, no problem there. Part of it also is, I think, as you go through this game and you know where the enemies are coming from, you, of course, will score higher in regards to, acquiring your target. But otherwise, a nice little fun diversion. All right, next up is Point Blank. And this collection actually has Point Blank 1, 2, and 3, which is amazing. And this is such a fun party game, especially with more than one player, especially if you're playing multiplayers. Huge amount of fun, especially if it happens to be a drinking party game. You'll notice, and as more drinks that you imbibe or others imbibe, your aim will get significantly worse. Again, this one, no problems whatsoever with the accuracy. It felt just as accurate as when I was playing on the PlayStation with the GunCon. So again, fun game, controls very well. For these type of games, I do recommend, of course, always, basically redoing your screen accuracy on calibrating your gun just to be safe. But otherwise, again, fun game, great party game, hours of fun, and you have all three, which is amazing. And next up, we've got Time Crisis for the PlayStation. Now, I wish that it was the main version for Happy Arcade, of course, but beggars can't be choosers, and it's already here. You, of course, if you did get the PC hookup like I did, and you're using MAME on your computer, you can easily just go ahead and use that. I honestly haven't emulated yet on my computer as far as when it comes to PlayStation games on my PC. I primarily use OpenMU on the Mac, since it's kind of pre-built in and it's pretty much dummy-proof. So this part I have not done since this is not compatible with the Mac that I know of, but I will definitely try that at a later point and maybe even do a kind of an updated video. The pedals itself work well. They do need to be plugged in and powered in order for them to work. So there is that. The one thing that is a little bit of annoyance is since there are so many wires when it comes to this RetroPad shooter, it's kind of an ugly thing to, have to keep out. So if you don't mind and you like to keep your place clean and of course not have anybody trip on the wires, I do recommend getting like a nice kind of a small box or case to put everything in when you're not using at least the gun portions of it. Otherwise, the unit itself is small. There's just a ton of wires, which unfortunately can't get away with this type of a product where there aren't cameras in the guns like the Sinden light guns. Next up, we've got Aliens, which I only got to play once or twice in the arcade. This was kind of a quarter muncher as well. Of course, if you are by Sega DreamWorks, which I am, this was able to be playable. This emulated very well. There was no hiccups, no slowdowns. Everything was great. It definitely captured the atmosphere of the Alien movies, and definitely one of the best Alien games, especially a light gun game that I can think of. This is probably my preferred versus the original Aliens game that came out in the late 80s. That was only in the arcade. Those did have a couple, I believe, first person segments possibly. And I can't remember. It's been a while since I played that. That is actually included on the RetroPad shooter. It's retro shooter. It's not just shooting games. There's about 5,000 plus games on here, which run the gamut from old school Pac-Man all the way to, of course, Capcom vs SNK 1 and 2 and Marvel vs. Capcom 2. The emulations for those fighting games are excellent, and of course with the USB, plug in your USB pad, USB stick. I even use those fighting games with the Neo Geo pad. Now, of course, as a Pandora Box 10, the reason why there's 5,000. There's also a lot of duplicates and kind of offhand versions of, say, like the Metal Slug series, the King of Fighters series, all the different versions of Street Fighter, even the Rainbow Edition is included. So if you have that, I mean, honestly, the Pandora Box 10, amazing. I do know they also sell the Pandora Box 10 if you did want a mod. I know there's some mods available for the Arcade 1-Up. So if you wanted to mod and make your own Arcade 1-Up Pandora Box shooter, there you go. Now, here is, of course, one of the games, Area 51, that's pretty popular. I do notice that some of the full motion video Lycon games has a little bit of sound kind of scratchiness. And honestly, I don't remember if that was the same in the arcade or if it's primarily just due to the emulation. I think this is the PlayStation version, and I don't think this is the arcade version. I honestly didn't play this in the arcade. I wasn't really into FMV based shooters. I was definitely more into like the Terminator games, Revolution X, those games versus these FMV ones. Of course, that also includes Lethal Enforcers 1 and 2, which is also part of the RetroPad shooter. There's about 5 pages of shooting games that you can play, even some really old ones from kind of the early 80s that I never played as well, which was a surprise. There's even some Super Nintendo games. So you can play some Super Scope games, so that like Battle Clash and everything else. And the Super Scope 6 game is included. The best part is with the new Lycon games, unlike the Super Scope, you don't have to change or adjust the color on your TV in order for the cameras to catch your light gun accuracy. So that is pretty sweet. And next up, we've got Jurassic Park. Now, this, of course, I would say you probably see it most Dave and Buster's, and of course, Sega GameWorks. Didn't play this too much. And also another quarter muncher. Controls very well, great super scaler. This would have been a wonderful game to have hopefully had come out on either the Sega Saturn or the 32X. I think, Sega, of course, could really, at least Sega of Japan, really made an error and didn't release a lot of their super scalar shooters and games either to the 32X or the Saturn. I think it would have done very well and would have helped, I think, Sega recoup a lot of the costs. Again, ad nauseum. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons why, Sega Japan, due to their hubris, maybe listen more to, being open to bringing more of these type of games. Sega, I think, as a console manufacturer, would still be around. Excuse me, today. Pardon me, sorry about that. But yeah, it's still a great game. Played it through, controls well, of course, calibrating your gun, no problem. Now, Duck Hunt is also on here. There's a couple like Gumshoe Alley and everything else. Hogan's Alley, Gunsmoke is on here as well. This is probably the best I've ever done. I never got to round 10 on the NES. So again, the retro shooter, completely worth the pickup, especially if you're picking it up when the pedals are included free as part of the price. I picked up the gold box. I didn't need the Supreme, which also included basically Bluetooth based arcade sticks. So if you were thinking about picking up the retro shooter as your all-in-one, completely recommend it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.